Sandstone. My name is Robin Bowden. I'm the volunteer coordinator at Sandstone Ranch Visitor and Learning Center. I'm so excited that you guys all made it here tonight. This is our third community night of the season, and it is unfortunately our last. But I'm so glad that all of you made it. So if you could take a moment and mute your cell phones, because this is the Pioneer Theater, and we want to make sure this is as authentic as we can. So welcome and travel back in time with us to hear the stories of real women who made a significant impact in the West. Please welcome Sue Shank and the Legendary Ladies.
Good evening. Welcome to our show. We are the Legendary Ladies, founded in 1992 as a volunteer educational nonprofit organization that promotes the history of women who helped make an impact in the West.
But if you glance into an old history book, you very rarely find them mentioned. So, we ladies are trying to highlight their accomplishments and write women back into history. Our organization is comprised of 17 ladies who portray over 30 different characters. Each lady researches a character, writes her own script, and creates a costume for a historically accurate performance. Now, after our performance, we will have a brief question and answer period. So get those questions ready for the ladies.
Will they answer in character?
Yes, they can. Sometimes they do, depends on the question. The women of the West were quite varied. You have only to look at the clothing they're wearing tonight to understand this. Some came with their husbands or fathers who were in search of gold, opportunity, or land in the West. Some came for their own reasons. These ladies found the landscape different than the one they'd left behind, and some had to learn new skills in order to survive. But they each had a challenge because of their gender or the path they chose. Today you will meet 4 unconventional women who have stepped out of the past to share their experience with you. Our first lady was a New York socialite who gave up the comforts of her New York socialite and her staid society life.
I was bored, completely bored with my society life in Auburn, New York. Oh, excuse me. I'm Rosamond Underwood, and in 1916, I was 29 years of age, a graduate of Smith Women's College, well-traveled, and all that was expected of me was to marry well. But before I settled, I wanted to do some good with my few talents, and I wanted adventure far from Auburn. And then, by chance, I heard about 2 teaching jobs in Elkhead, Colorado. This remote homesteading community with just 10 families, no roads, and a brand new modern schoolhouse. Well, I knew I wanted to go, as long as my best friend Dorothy Woodruff would come with me. She and I had done everything together since kindergarten. Of course, we had no teaching experience and had never worked for anyone, ever. Undaunted, we applied, and they hired us. My friends were shocked. Rosamond, you'll never find a suitable husband out there. My father said, no daughter of mine is going to that dangerous, uncivilized place. But my mother understood. I've never seen you so excited, dear. The day we left New York, the headlines in the Syracuse Times-Journal read, Society girls go to wilds of Colorado. And 5 days later, we arrived in the wilds of Colorado when our train pulled into the tiny mountain town of Hayden. After a thrilling 12-hour train ride over the mountains from Denver. Well, here it was late and pitch dark out. What now, Dorothy? Then the door opened and we heard a friendly voice. Say, you must be Miss Woodruff and Miss Underwood. I'm Ferry Carpenter. Well, I knew the name. Mr. Carpenter had hired us. And according to his sister, who kindly wrote to tell us exactly what clothes to bring, he was the local hero, a cattle rancher, homesteader, and a graduate of Princeton and Harvard Law School. It was his idea to build the schoolhouse and recruit cultured, educated Eastern girls as the school teachers. well, and prospective brides for all the lonely bachelors. The ad had read, "No application will be considered without a recent photograph." The next morning, Mr. Carpenter came by with a wagon and a driver to take us to the Harrison Ranch where we would board. I had told him, we'd much rather stay with a family than live by ourselves. Heavens, Dorothy and I had always had servants. We had never cooked or done any household chore. When the wagon finally stopped, we saw our energetic little landlady rushing out to greet us. She would be the first of the many invincible women I would meet in Colorado, and we quickly became friends. Why, after Dorothy and I spent an entire Saturday washing just 2 blouses, she said, My, you girls really don't know anything about housework, do you? I'll do your laundry for an extra $1 a week. Mary Harrison took such good care of us. Why, the first time I saw that schoolhouse, I was so amazed. Here was this large stone building rising up from a flat mountaintop with nothing but magnificent long views all around. And inside we walked into this huge, bright and sunny room that had a partition to separate our classes. Dorothy was teaching the younger children on one side, and I had grades 6, 7, 8, and 9. We then went downstairs to see the new gymnasium, furnace room, and fully equipped domestic science classroom. Guess who was teaching the girls homemaking skills? Me. Needless to say, we were very nervous about teaching at first, afraid we'd make a mistake and disappoint all these truly wonderful people. However, over and over, parents would come and say to us, "We're so grateful that you two refined girls came all this way to educate our children." Well, we in turn were extremely grateful for this exciting opportunity. Why, the very first day we taught the children the Pledge of Allegiance, "My country 'tis of thee," and corrected one little boy who said, I know, Mr. Carpenter is the President of the United States." On election day that year, I was so surprised to see both men and women come to the schoolhouse to cast their ballot for president. Why, back home, our friends were still demanding women's suffrage. Here, women in Colorado have been voting for 23 years. When winter came that year, it was especially harsh and long. Dorothy and I rode our horses through 6 feet of snow and below 0 cold, just to get to school and back. But of course, the children coped with so much worse. On our home visits, we found that entire families lived in cramped cabins and survived on cabbage, squash, and turnips. No chickens or cows. "We eat a lot of porcupine," the little boys would tell us. And the children were coming to school for miles wearing just worn and torn trousers and shoes and very thin, tattered clothing. So we wrote to our families and said, "Send warm clothes and more books for these children." And all year long, boxes and barrels arrived filled with food, clothes, books, and gifts for the children. My social life began with Ferry Carpenter's rollicking 30th birthday party, held at his homestead with over 100 men, women, and children. Why, he had teased us. "This'll be kind of a coming out party for you school marms." But the true belle of the ball that night was Elcat's very first indoor flush toilet. People would rush up and say, "Happy birthday, Ferry, now show us that new flush toilet." And a little later in the evening, all the furniture was moved out and everybody danced until dawn, including me. Oh, Mr. Carpenter was a terrific dancer, and I so enjoyed meeting his handsome friend, Mr. Bob Perry. Soon after, here came Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Perry to court me. Oh, everyone knew Dorothy was already spoken for because the mailman told all the men, "Don't bother with her. She gets letters from a man in Michigan." Well, I liked both men very much. Ferry Carpenter was ambitious and witty, a true entrepreneur. Bob Perry, well, he came from a wealthy Denver family, a prominent Denver family, and he was superintendent at the Moffett mine. Who to choose? Ferry or Perry? The school year was over in April, and Dorothy and I were so sad to leave the children and our jobs. But we did return to Auburn to plan our weddings. Yes, I married Bob Perry. We settled in Denver and had 3 children. The scheme to lure the brides worked. 12 more school teachers married local men. I lost Bob after just 17 years and was widowed for over 20. And then I married my other love, Barry Carpenter. And we lived at his ranch in Hayden, where quite often former students would come by and visit. And they always told me that the year I taught them changed their lives and showed them a world outside of Elkhead. But, truth be told, the world I found in Elkhead changed my life forever.
Our next lady was the first female professor at the University of Colorado who led a double life.
My story could have been similar to so many other women who were struggling to survive because I too did not come from a background of wealth. However, I was fortunate to have received an outstanding education which enabled me to live a very fulfilling life. Oh, forgive me, I haven't even introduced myself to you. My name is Mary Rippon, and I am an educator. In 1877, I was hired by Dr. Joseph Sewell, the first president of the University of Colorado. I was hired to teach French and German. I, along with Dr. Sewell and 2 other teachers, comprised the first faculty at the fledgling university. Thereafter, I entered the realm of academia, in which there were few professional women educators, much less one who also taught coeducational classes. I thrived at the university, and I excelled in the man's world of academia without losing my feminine virtues. I gained my professorship, and I won accolades from my students, fellow faculty members, and townspeople alike. I immersed myself in the community of Boulder, and a friend and I started the first literary club for women, in which we encouraged them to gain knowledge and explore interests beyond that of being a housewife and a mother. It should be apparent to you by now that I did not fit into the role assigned to women in the Victorian era, and that I was independent. I knew how to handle my money, and I was very well educated. I was indeed fortunate to have received my extensive education because I did not come from a moneyed family. My father was a farmer in Illinois who died when I was quite young. Because he died without a will, the courts decreed that I, and not my mother, was his legal heir, and I inherited the farm. This soon caused a dissension in my family, and my mother left. Let me explain to you what happened. My mother had remarried after my father died, and she and her new husband and I were living on the family farm. But remember, she didn't own the farm, I did. And because I was a minor, the courts had appointed one of my uncles as the administrator of my father's estate. And acting as such, he sold the farm. Therefore, my mother and her new husband had to leave. The last time I saw my mother was when I was 5 years old. Thereafter, my grandfather and my uncles became my guardians. They handled my inheritance, and they guided my education through various boarding schools, high school, and then my extensive studies in Europe. At the university, I quickly became the role model for the female students, and I strived to uphold the philosophy of Dr. Sewell, one in which he espoused living a life of the highest honor, virtue, and integrity. His philosophy, however, soon placed me in a very difficult position because I was also living another life, a private life unknown to all, but a very few of my closest family and friends. His name was Will Housel. He was one of my students. We knew we should not have been seeing each other, but in the spring of 1888, I knew I was carrying his child. What was I going to do? I knew that if the university found out I was going to be a mother, I would have lost my job. So we quietly left Boulder and traveled to Kansas, where we were married. Then we journeyed on to Illinois, where I had relatives, and we could live openly as husband and wife, and we could decide what to do next. I finally made a decision to ask for a leave of absence, and when it came through, I immediately left for Germany to stay with friends and await the birth of our child. Meanwhile, Will returned to his studies at the university. Our daughter Miriam was born in Stuttgart, Germany, January 17, 1889. The following summer, Will joined us, and we took the time to ponder our situation. We were now a family with a mother and a father and a child, but how were we going to live? Will could not support us. He was still a student. He had no career and no monies, whereas I, on the other hand, did have a career and an inheritance. So we made a very unusual decision in that Will and Miriam would remain in Germany, and I would return to my teaching position at the university. I would become the sole support of the family. Now, Will did come back to Boulder the following year, but we were still not able to live as husband and wife. Since I was still the sole support of the family, it was imperative that I not disclose my marriage nor my motherhood. We brought Miriam over, but I was reluctant to have her stay with me for fear that our relationship would become public knowledge. So we temporarily placed her in an orphanage in Denver. Meanwhile, Will finished his studies at the university, and then he tried endeavor after endeavor, seeking to establish himself in some sort of career or enterprise, and failing in each one. We finally realized the futility of our marriage, and in 1893, Will left for the Midwest, taking Miriam with him. Since he still was not established in a career, and in order to ensure Miriam's care, I continued to support both of them. In fact, I continued to support Will for many, many years after our divorce, even after he remarried and started another family. Now, throughout all this time, Miriam knew me only as her Aunt Mary. As much as I wanted to tell her the truth about our relationship, I was afraid to do so, for fear that she would inadvertently let slip our little secret, which would have placed my career in jeopardy. But I did pay for all of her support, all of her education, and gave her financial assistance when she married another student. When her marriage faltered and failed, I counseled her to seek a career as a teacher, which she did, and she also taught at the university for a number of years. I ultimately retired after a very long, illustrious career. In fact, the amphitheater on the campus is named after me. However, I still had not told Miriam the true circumstances surrounding her birth. The truth became more apparent to her, however, after her father died, as his estate was left in such a disarray, she was forced to prove her parentage. So she traveled to Kansas, and there she found the record of our marriage from so many years before. I never did publicly proclaim Miriam to be my daughter. After all this time, how could I now break my silence? But I did name her the inheritor of my estate, and I took the precaution at that time of advising my remaining relatives what I had done so they would not contest my will. I died in 1935 at the age of 85, but it wasn't until 1976, when my grandson brought some of my papers to the university, that the story of my other private life became known. So some may say I led a very unconventional life. Perhaps, but I did what I had to do.
This Colorado suffragist helped Colorado women get the vote in 1893.
If this were 1890, you could have read my column, Woman's World, in the Rocky Mountain News. I used my birth name, Ellis Meredith, for my columns and later for my books, even when I was married. You ladies out there, you would not have been voting for the last century because the law said only men could vote. As a young girl, I heard the word suffrage and didn't know what it meant. Turns out it is a Latin word meaning the right to vote, a right women had to fight for state by state. When Colorado applied for statehood in 1876, women asked that the word male, M-A-L-E, be changed so the law said every person over age 21 could vote. When the papers next day said the men were interested but amused by the ladies' idea, I was furious. It was not funny. We were dead serious. Of course, they defeated it, saying Colorado would not be admitted to the Union with women voting. They did let women run and vote for the school board, though. The very next year, 1877, the legislature put woman suffrage on the ballot, but it suffered a terrible defeat. The press was for us, but the preachers were against us, saying women should be wives and mothers and do nothing else. Ridicule was rampant, especially for suffrage leaders from the East who came to help. Why, they even called Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone disappointed old maids. And Lucy was married. For the next 16 years, we women joined clubs and learned leadership, organization, and how politics worked, which I understood very well. In fact, I was described as a woman of excellent ability who knew too darn much about politics. As the first woman reporter to cover the State House, I watched nervously in 1893 as the Colorado legislature debated whether to put woman suffrage on the ballot again. After 3 months, the issue came to a vote in the legislature, and lo and behold, it passed. So here we were, the Colorado Nonpartisan Equal Suffrage Association, with 7 months to campaign, 28 members, and only $25 in our treasury. I took a long train ride to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair to ask Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone for help again. Colorado was in a severe economic depression and there was no money. Well, they had no money either, but they sent Carrie Chapman Capp, a convincing speaker and organizer. She traveled Colorado by train and wagon, sometimes speaking twice a day. Remember, only the men could vote. So she spoke to the miners and the farmers, the mechanics and the factory workers. Why, her Sunday speech, the Bible and woman suffrage, made the ministers realize that women were their best customers, and this time they preached for women voting. I kept hearing that women did not want to vote and would not if they could. So I came up with a plan. Let's run Mrs. Ione Hannah for the school board. I was one of hundreds of women who stood in line for hours to vote, and Mrs. Hannah was elected. We showed them women would vote if we could. 3/4 of Colorado newspapers agreed to publish suffrage material, and Lucy Stone from back east sent us $300, which paid for thousands of leaflets. The labor unions were for us, even if Mother Jones was not, and the Women's Christian Temperance Union served up soup with a dash of suffrage to the unemployed miners in tents. The miners said, "Let the women vote. Can't do any worse than the men. Look at this depression and no jobs." Our biggest enemy, though, was the liquor industry, which was afraid women would be against drinking if we could vote. 3 days before the election, they put out an anti-suffrage leaflet anonymously. But a small emblem of the Denver Brewers Association gave them away, and the publicity helped us. November 7, election day came. We women campaigned all day. I could hardly sleep that night in anticipation. Next day, as the votes rolled in, we could see we had won. With 65,000 men voting, we won by more than 6,000 votes. The men of Colorado were not afraid or ashamed to give women equal rights with themselves. And unlike Wyoming, that grandfathered it in, Colorado became the first state to approve women's suffrage by a vote of the people. I mean, the men. In 1917, I moved to Washington, D.C., continued in politics, and worked for passage of a national suffrage amendment. I can see the billboard now that said, "Women of Colorado, you have the vote. Get it for women of the nation by voting against Woodrow Wilson, because he did not support suffrage." He was elected, but we had the last laugh. When he got off the train the day before his inauguration, he looked around and said, "Where are all the people?" And the reply was, "Over on Pennsylvania Avenue watching the parade for women's suffrage." And there we were in our white dresses with purple, white, and gold sashes, marching to the White House. Women finally won the vote in 1920 when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. I lived to age 90, so I voted in many elections. It can truly be said that I, Ellis Meredith, was born a suffragist and used my talents to make Let the Women Vote come true.
What does it take to become a lady? She actually was one.
After my divorce, people said I could no longer claim the title Lady Moon. But dearie, I earned that title and I aim to keep it. I was hired to nurse a remittance man through mountain fever at a neighboring ranch near Fort Collins. Now, being from Ireland, I knew what a remittance man was. It meant that he came from a wealthy English family who sent him a yearly stipend while he learned ranching skills. The moment I met Cecil, I wanted to marry him. This was a problem because I was already married to someone else. Frank Gartman and I had been hitched for 5 years. Back when I wed Frank, I remember thinking, I got me a proper husband. Not bad for the daughter of Irish farmers, orphaned and come to America at age 12. Why, Catherine Grattan Louder, I said to myself, I think this is a step up, especially for a gal dubbed Cussin' Kate, on account of having a mouth like a man. Oh, don't worry. I aim to keep my words respectable for you folks. Frank worked for $1 a day at the Manhattan mines, and I took in washing and ironing for the cowboys and the miners. We saved our money, bought a property that we named Elkhorn Ranch, and developed it into a working proposition. But now, I was over the moon for Cecil Moon. It's been said that Cecil paid Frank to divorce me and leave me the ranch. Well, I ain't admitting or denying that story, but when Cecil and I wed in 1888, we lived at Elkhorn Ranch, and Frank was nowhere around. We worked that ranch and lived off his stipend for 10 years when word came that his father and older brother had both died. Since he was next in line for the family fortune and the title Baron Moon, He now owned the Ceylon mines near India that produced the gems known as moonstones. And I was now Lady Catherine Moon. No more washing and ironing for me. We left for England right away with plans to stay. We attended a day at the Ascot races. Men in pinstripe suits and top hats, ladies in the latest fashions and huge plumed hats. Dearie, I never had to dress so fancy to watch horses run. Everyone speaking in hushed tones. Cecil was a gambler, so he placed a bet on a horse that had caught my eye, and I watched as my horse fell behind the pack. Run, you son of a gun, run! My horse lost. I ripped off my feathered hat. I was soon informed that such behavior is not seemly for a proper lady. Cecil's family never did accept me. They said I was loud, crude, and boisterous. But, truth be told, it was Cecil who disappointed them the most. On a trip to Paris, he lost $10,000 on a poker hand. His family said he was too irresponsible and paid him a large sum of money to leave. So we returned to Colorado. And dearie, I did not come back empty-handed. Among other things, I shipped back china, cut glass, a piano, a lovely Queen Victoria chair. Because of Cecil's frivolous spending, and with his blessing, I took control of the properties and the money and put him on an allowance. He didn't mind, he was used to that. In fact, when we later divorced, I was the first woman in Colorado to pay alimony. I worked that ranch like a man, but always dressed as a lady, well, except for my boots. Rumors began to fly. People claimed that my foreman and I were involved in cattle rustling. Now, dearie, that was just a misunderstanding. The truth is, I did not like getting down off my horse because of the difficulty of getting myself back up. So, as I rode out across the neighbors' adjoining properties, I could easily lean down from the saddle and unlatch the gate. But I couldn't relatch it from horseback, so I just rode on. I guess there were a few mix-ups as a result. They said that I made bootleg whiskey and carried it to town in specially made pockets in my bloomers. That I burned my house down to collect the insurance money. Now, dearie, I ain't admitting or denying any of that, but I will say that I enjoyed a good time, always had weekend parties, and never lacked for male companionship. I may have had a questionable reputation, but what they forget to say is that I was always generous and frequently shared my wealth with those less fortunate. I willed my jewelry to some of the poor women in town, a horse to a neighboring girl, $1,000 to the Larimer County Hospital to help fund bed for indigent patients, and the rest to St. Vincent's Orphanage in Denver. My final resting spot is Mount Olivet Cemetery, where I am buried wearing my favorite mistletoe pin. My will also directs that my tombstone read Lady Moon, but those gentlemen just carved a simple M-O-O-N. Now, dearie, the one thing I must insist upon is respect, because dagnabbit, I am a lady.
Rosamond Underwood, Mary Rippon, Ellis Meredith, Lady Moon. These ladies survived by their wit and determination. They and countless others have blazed the trail for freedom and individuality that women enjoy today. Join me in saluting their courage. We would like to thank the Sandstone Ranch and Robin for inviting us here tonight. It has been an honor to perform for you. Now, who has those questions for either the ladies' character or our organization? Yes.
I have a question for the suffragette. Did you work with the Grimke sisters from Charleston, who not only were seeking women's suffrage, but also about abolition of slavery?
The question is, say that again. Oh, did you work with the Grimke sisters?
Well, the Grimke sisters were back east, and I was here in Colorado. We did have Eastern suffragists come, Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone and Carrie Chapman Catt, but they stayed back east, so we didn't have them. It might have been a little earlier, too. Our final fight was 1893, but we did start early, like in the 1850s or 60s. 5 times it took to finally pass it, but we didn't work with them directly.
I have one for her.
Yes.
How come Mother Jones was against this?
The question is, why was Mother Jones against it?
I'm not going to give this lady the microphone because she goes on and on. She plays Mother Jones. She felt it was the wealthy women back east that were uppity, and it was not the working women. However, in the West, I was a working woman. I worked for the Rocky Mountain News, and the labor unions here were for suffrage. So her opinions were based mainly on back east. Now she can have it. Well, it's true. There was no love lost between her and the women's suffrage movement, primarily because Mother Jones was very involved with the welfare of the working poor. And she felt like the suffragettes didn't have any interest in improving the lives and working conditions of the working poor. And that's where her concerns were. So she just never really got involved with what they did. She was so involved with trying to better the working conditions for the miners and the working poor and their families. And then also she did a lot of work with Southern families and was very instrumental in getting child labor laws enacted, because children were not only working in the coal mines, particularly when a father died, but also because children were also working in the cotton mills down south. So their interests were not basically the same, but they really did not support each other.
Any more questions? Yes.
How do you generally choose who you want to do, and how do you research them? Or research and write?
The person that we research has to have interest for us and kind of has to sing to you. A lot of times we will start researching a character and find that it just isn't us. So we move on to another character, but we do a lot of research. And I will just let the microphone pass down, and each lady can tell you about their character.
Ellis Meredith's papers are at History Colorado in their education library. 2 full boxes, all in file folders. She was a reporter. She saved everything. And I held original letters from Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone and Carrie Chapman Catt in my hand. It was like, I could not believe it. There was also a backlash, and she saved all those papers. And you can go see them. It's very interesting. So the hard thing is condensing all that down to 7 minutes. And there's 2 boxes full of stuff. Yeah.
I had a similar experience at the History Museum in Fort Collins, where they brought out to me files and files of information about Catherine Moon. But I got to see her last will and testament. I got to see her deposition when she testified for her foreman, who did go to court over cattle rustling. So, and pictures, lots of pictures. So it's just fascinating, and the more you get involved in those characters, the more they speak to you, and you really want to get their story out.
Well, with Mary Rippon, there's not much written about her, really. Just primarily 1 book, but it was astounding. The University of Colorado, they were stunned when they found out that she had led this double life all this time. Nobody had any idea. And as I said, she died in 1935. It wasn't until 1976 when these papers were brought to the university that they went through them and realized that she had led this double life all this time, had been married, and had a child. And they had no idea. And I know some women, I try to impress upon people the fact that it was so different then than it is now, where many women now are working because they want to or they have to. But back then, she had the job. She was hired as a teacher, but she was single. And if she would have announced to them that she was married, she would have lost her job. And a lot of people can't comprehend that. And much more when she was a mother, she never could have kept her job. But she was the prime source of support for the family. He never was able to really support them. He could never get himself established. He just didn't have that capability. And she did. So she supported the family. But again, it was a very unusual situation than what women go through now.
Was it her grandson you said that brought the paper?
Yes, it was her grandson.
Well, if my story sounds a little bit familiar, there's a book called Nothing Daunted by Dorothy Wickenden. Okay, I read the book. I loved Rosamond. I loved the story, and I had a connection with the woman that owns the Elkhead Schoolhouse. So I was able to even go there. I wanted to say, look up there. Kind of looks like Elkhead. So when I walked in, I thought, oh, I think Rosamond's quite at home here in Elkhead. So that's how I chose that character. And she's not, historical, and you don't find papers from her, but she was a school teacher, and she had to quit. Even though she married Bob Perry and moved right back where she was, she couldn't teach either.
I've always wondered how in the world do those people in the early days live in the mountains? How'd they climb up there? How did they not freeze? What about the avalanches? So the character that I portray is Captain Jack. She was a lady miner. So and if you have a chance, you can read Stampede to Timberline. It's all about the mining camps in Colorado. So do we have any other questions?
Has anybody done Doc Susie?
Yes, we do have a Doc Susie.
Do you have any of you have training in acting, or how do you prep?
No, not really, but we do workshops. We find.
I was a drama major and taught drama for many years.
Yes, indeed. And we do another ladies that do storytelling. We've taken workshops from them.
Another one of our members, our artistic director, is in the theater department at CU. So she gives us the final polish or whatever.
Any
How
more?
many of there are you?
There are 17 ladies, and hopefully 18 ladies sitting over there. We have 2 more that have signed up that want additions to our show, so hopefully we will be growing. Yay! Yes. Yes, we have a sign-up sheet over there. We'd like to have you.
Run out of ladies?
Oh, yes. Well, with over 30 characters, you will see a different show every time. Oh, yes, our website. Thank you. legendaryladies.org.
Rock.
All righty, thank you.